Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm so thrilled to be here today with Cheryl Bachelder, and we will be getting started with our formal program in just a few minutes. Hi, Cheryl.
Hello, Becky. It's good to be here today.
It's great to see you. So people are beginning to join. I see lots. We had a record number of attendees. Nearly 700 people are planning to be with us today, although I'm curious if any of you are calling in from areas affected by Hurricane Flo, and if so, be sure and tell us. I know that there are some of our team members who have been affected or are evacuating. So as you begin to come on, I would invite you to come to the chat panel and tell us where you're calling in from today. I also understand that there are lots of folks in organizations and corporations who are excited to learn from Cheryl today. And so if you are in an organization that's gathering to attend today's webinar, I would love to hear about that. So welcome in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and Louisville, Kentucky, and Columbia, South Carolina. Looks like somewhere in Canada, Alabama, Tennessee, someone in Raleigh, North Carolina. I hope you're evacuating. Los Angeles, New Hampshire, Greenville, New York City, Chicago, Texas, Atlanta, California, Phoenix, Green Bay. Wow, we have folks represented across the U.S., and we're so thrilled to have you with us today. So as we get started, you've already found the chat panel, so you will be prepared throughout the event. We want to invite you to engage with one another about the topics. We want to invite you to share any questions. Oh my goodness, I see that we have someone from Malawi here today.
Yes, we saw Zimbabwe too.
Oh my goodness, it's moving so fast. We are thrilled that all of you are investing this time with us. And one of the things I also wanted to note is that we are scheduled to be here for 60 minutes. We will be on time. We will end promptly at 2:00 p.m. We know you have other commitments, and we're thrilled that you are setting aside this time to learn with us. So a few other things to be aware of. You may notice that we are recording today's event, and we will make the recording available to you after the fact in case you want to share it with colleagues or watch it again or have some deeper learning. We would also invite you, if you're interested in live tweeting your thoughts about today's conversation, you can use the hashtag Dare to Serve, and we would love to engage with you there later. So we welcome you to do that. So welcome to the leaders at Valley Creek Church in Flower Mound, Texas. Very cool. I haven't seen any other groups come through, but again, it's been moving really fast, so I'm not sure. So we will be sharing again, as I mentioned, the recording and also a PDF of today's slides. So you can tune in and lean in and enjoy the conversation. I also want to note that we did receive some questions via email in advance of today's event. And so when we get toward the end of the hour and we welcome your questions throughout, we will get to just as many of them as we can. And for those that we can't get to, I'm hoping that Cheryl may be inspired to write some blog posts inspired by your questions. So I imagine that Cheryl needs no introduction to most of the folks that are on this call, but I'm going to take a moment to tell you a little bit more about Cheryl. As you might know, Cheryl is the former CEO of Popeyes Louisiana Kitchen, which is a multi-billion-dollar chain of more than 2,600 restaurants around the world. And in her work as CEO at Popeyes, she was profiled in the Wall Street Journal, featured on Mad Money, and received top industry awards as she turned around the stock prices at Popeyes. And she tells the story of that in her amazing book, Dare to Serve. And one of the reasons we're here today is to celebrate the upcoming launch of the new edition, which I have with me, and which I know Cheryl has with her as well. It's going to be released in just a few weeks. A few things you may or may not know about Cheryl. She's also a mom and a grandma, and she held prior leadership positions at Yum Brands, Domino's, RJR Nabisco, the Gillette Company, and Procter & Gamble. And since leaving Popeyes, Cheryl has been serving on boards and mentoring CEOs and speaking around the country and also investing in philanthropy. And one of the other things that Cheryl has been doing is learning and reflecting as a continuous learner. And so we're thrilled, Cheryl, that you're sharing some of that learning with us today.
Good to be here with you. I just want to add my welcome to everyone on the line. I continue to be amazed at the hundreds of you that are making time in your day for these conversations. They are such important conversations, and we'll work hard to make them meaningful for you today. In my mind, there's nothing more powerful than advancing our leadership skills in a way that serves our organizations well. So thank you from the bottom of my heart that you've made the time to be here. I wish we were all in my living room so we could just chat face to face. Let's just pretend that we are. I welcome you all as friends. Some of the names I recognize, some that I don't, but you are all friends pursuing better leadership. So I welcome you here today. Becky asked me, what have you been thinking about for the last year and some months since Popeyes was sold? And it's a lovely question. Those of you that know me well know that I just am a kind of a voracious learner. I read a ton. I think too much is what my family would tell you. But I'm always trying to process, what are we learning about leadership? How can we advance these conversations in the marketplace? How can we make them real so that they have impact on people's lives and the performance of organizations? So it won't surprise you that I'm still thinking about a lot of the things that I've written about before. Some of the themes will sound familiar, but I do have a few fresh thoughts for you that have come from the last year. The agenda you see on your screen is kind of the highlights of what we're going to talk about. In the area of the dare, which is really about courage, I want to talk about how I see women transforming leadership for the better. And this is not a conversation just for women. I think it opens up a whole conversation about how men and women approach leadership and how we can advance our effectiveness as leaders. But I am going to share with you some data on the topic that I think you'll find fascinating. Then we're going to shift to the serving element of our conversation. And it won't surprise you that I continue to think about whether human dignity is really being expressed in the workplace. We're going to dig in on that a little bit. And finally, we're going to talk about some new research on culture formation and the importance of delivering both a caring environment and a results orientation. So those are the three topics we have teed up, and I'm just excited to jump in.
I am too. So Cheryl, starting with that daring and courage, I would love to hear more from you about this topic of great leadership and how women are shaping that conversation.
Well, the first thing I'd share is that, I believe it is courageous to aim to be a great leader. Each of you is in a role in an organization, for profit or nonprofit, wherever you're placed. You've been given an opportunity for influence. And the question I'm always provoking with you is, are you courageously stepping out into that opportunity for influence? And are you doing it in the most effective way? And so I will always be encouraging you to be courageous in your convictions about leadership. We have that expression in English about the courage of our convictions. And yet, sometimes it's pretty hard to tell what the leader's convictions are about leadership. So I'm all about, let's get more transparent about that. Now, today I have something to share with you that's helped me think about this topic of effective leadership. I was blessed to be part of a piece of research last year. It was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. It was conducted by the Korn Ferry Institute. Aubrey, you can advance that first slide. And what they did is they interviewed and studied 57 women CEOs. And I was grateful to be part of this because it gave me access to the learning firsthand. They interviewed us deeply. They assessment test us to kind of profile who we are and how we lead. And then they've made this study public so that all can learn from it. On this screen, you'll see a link. You can either Google Women CEOs Speak, or you can click on that link and get the full study. But here's the cool thing. It is the first piece of research I'm aware of on really understanding the difference between how women CEOs and male CEOs lead. And are there any differences? Going into this, I don't think any of us knew. Would we profile just the same, or would we have some differences? So this is a really important piece of research. It's one of the only studies like this I know. And I think it will give men and women both insight into what strong leadership looks like and how leadership is changing because both men and women are in the room. So before we go to the data, I want to give you kind of a high level of what the executive summary was in this study. And if you're taking notes, these are things you might want to ask questions about. The first finding is, please don't go to that slide just yet. The first finding is very few women ever planned on being CEOs. And my response to that is, so what? I mean, who really knows if you're going to become a CEO? I think that's fairly unimportant. They made a big deal that 65% of women didn't know they were going to be a CEO. I'd like to talk to anyone that knew for sure they were going to be a CEO. So let's move on. Here's a cool one. 40% of the women CEOs started out with a college degree in science, engineering, or math. So if you are a young woman, I do think we saw an advantage for women with a STEM background. I'm a big fan of STEM. I have two daughters. One of them's a liberal arts major. One of them's a science major, an engineer. But in leadership, that STEM training seems to be really valuable. Right behind it were the liberal arts and business and economic degrees. The third point was there was no single path to the top. Oh goodness, I'm so glad about this finding. You know, we're not clones, we're not all the same. The path is never going to be the same for one versus another. So be okay with that. Your path will be your path. The next one I really thought was important was seeking out challenge. There was a very common theme among all women CEOs that we took challenges. We took hard jobs. You know, in my case, I was a turnaround leader. I went to brands and companies that were struggling and helped them figure out how to transform themselves. It turns out most women take those hard, challenging assignments. So if you're in a hard assignment right now, you're in the right place to demonstrate your skills. Now, the next point is, it turns out women are a little bit more motivated by purpose and culture than the average CEO. Wow, that warms my heart, because I think we're all better with clarity around our personal purpose, with strong positive cultures in our companies. If women are bringing that to the stage, I'm excited about that, and we can talk about that more today. But Becky, I think the real point we want to dive in on here is, are women different, or are they the same in the CEO leadership role? So let's go to that next slide, Aubrey. This is hard for you to see, so you don't need to read the chart in detail, but let me just give you the headlines because they're really fun to think about. Of 20 traits that are considered the ideal traits of a CEO by Korn Ferry Institute's research, okay? So these are the 20 traits that have proven out to be aligned with CEO success. Women were identical to the benchmark on 16 out of 20. I think that's the first important finding. There wasn't a difference. There wasn't a big difference. Now you can argue why that is. Maybe women learned how to do these things. Well, yes, men did too. So, you know, by the time we got to the CEO job, we knew how to do 16 of the 20 things that are important to do. Now look at that list on the left. Women were agile. They were risk takers. They were optimistic. By the way, 81% of CEOs are optimistic. They were influencers, able to get work done through others. They proved trustworthy to their organizations. They were high achievers. So I'm sure some of you have read things like women don't take risks and women don't take the tough jobs. Well, the women who advance do. They're risk takers. I think for me, that was the highlight of that left finding, is take risks. Risks are what business leaders take. It's part of how you get to performance. It's necessary. And successful women and men leaders are doing that. So are there differences? Yes, on only 4 attributes. And frankly, only 2 of them are very meaningful, but really interesting stuff. The 2 biggest differences on women CEOs were they were less confident and more humble. I mean, by a wide margin, they were more humble. That one was a standout difference. But I want to start with confidence. The researchers were very clear. The women CEOs were not lacking confidence. The difference was where they placed their confidence. They were more likely to put confidence in their people and their teams than to focus on their own confidence. Let's all take a pause there.
That is really powerful.
Isn't that an insight, Becky?
It
I
really
think,
is.
I've heard the less confident thing before, like, women just don't, ask for the job and that kind of thing. I've heard that before. But to hear it described as a different kind of confidence, it's essentially being described as a less self-focused confidence, less ego, more interested in how to bring out and advance the enterprise through the team. Women in this study had a tremendous amount of confidence in their team.
Well, and that seems to me, Cheryl, to be tied to this idea of humility, because humility says I don't have to be in control. I don't have to have the answers. I can depend on others to get the results with me.
Yes, there was another very funny conversation offline with the researchers. One of them said, basically women seem to understand that they're not God.
Hmm.
And I really liked the way she said it. This quote on the chart kind of gets to that combination of traits you're talking about, Becky, which says, if we are more confident in our teams and more humble about ourselves, it means we value the contributions of others and we understand that we can't single-handedly bend the future to our will. We're not in control of all the outcomes. I remember the first time I said that to the Popeyes organization. I said, I am not in control of all the outcomes. And someone said, well, you're a CEO, aren't you supposed to be? I said, I'm sorry, I'm not God. I am only here as a good steward towards the best outcomes we can generate, but we do not have control. So I think there's a beautiful vulnerability in that, in leaders who will stand before their organizations and say, I'm right here with you, team. We're going to go to a bold destination together. It won't be perfect. I'm not certain of the outcome either, but boy, we're going to go for it together and give it our best shot as a team. So this to me was the conversation. If you want to have a conversation between the men and women on this call, if you want to talk about how do we become better leaders, I think this conversation of how we can bring less confidence in our own impact and more humility to the team. How can we develop those traits in both men and women leaders in a way that creates a better place for people to contribute their best work? That's the conversation I encourage you to have with your team.
So Cheryl, I'm curious what possible resistance you see, or what possible barriers you see to this type of approach of, let's set aside our ego, let's have confidence in our team, and co-owning results with a humble attitude to what we can control as leaders. Where are the resistance points?
Yeah, there's very much resistance. I've already heard resistance from women leaders that they don't like this less confident, more humble thing. They think it looks like weakness, and we ought to buck up and become confident and strong, right? There's this inherent misconception of servant leadership as being a doormat or a weak leader. I wish I had a magic wand and could make that go away, but it's deeply rooted in our culture. Our culture likes bombastic, loud, extroverted, all for me kinds of leaders. We celebrate them all day long. And so this is a real cultural confrontation to have this conversation. But let me remind you, it's not a conversation I started. Let's take a best-selling book like Good to Great, which in 2001 said the best leaders with the best financial performance are level 5, which Jim Collins called a humble leader. So this idea we have to hone in on and have some conflict about is a person who engages their team and is less focused on self creates a better performance environment for the enterprise. If you believe the numbers, that's what they say. And we've got to get our courage up to own that and overcome the cultural norm. I don't pound on tables and swear at meetings. I'm not going to. If that's required, I never would have been a CEO. So men and women, we got to get comfortable in our own skin. If we want to be this kind of leader who serves, we're going against the grain. and we're going to have to step out there and demonstrate it and be authentically what we have conviction about.
And what I hear you saying, Cheryl, is that you're learning that this, of course, just to emphasize the point, it has nothing to do with gender. It has to do with making a choice to lead in a certain way.
So let me remind you the math. If this CEO benchmark we're looking at was 50% women and 50% men, humility and lower confidence would be normative. You follow? If 50% of these CEOs were women and 50% men, these traits would be more typical in CEO leadership. So the opportunity is for us to lead to that place and make them so. And I'm counting on all of you on the phone to be the momentum in this conversation, because I believe women and men bring great talents and great traits to leadership. And it is when we bring both of our wirings and our strengths together that the enterprise is best served. All the Gallup research on engagement says leadership teams that are 50-50 male-female yield superior results. And one of the reasons is we're kind of designed to complement each other in the workplace and in our communities, right? We bring differences. And if we can get comfortable with that and access that, I think we can make leadership more effective.
So a quick question that had come in earlier from Peter regarding women in the role of CEO. He's mentioning that the restaurant industry just lost two of its most prominent female chain executives, Karen Stutz and Kelly. I'm not sure how to say her last name. I'm sure you must know who she is, Cheryl. He's saying that follows a dramatic decrease in the number of women who serve public companies as CEO. Do you have any insights or input on what's happening with that trend?
Well, I would just remind you there aren't very many women CEOs in the restaurant industry or elsewhere. Nationally, only 6% of the CEOs are women. So when you have a CEO leave, whether it's Sally Smith at Buffalo Wild Wings or Cheryl or anybody else, Julia left IHOP, right? So when we leave, it's a big number. It's a big change in the number because there were only 4 or 5 to begin with. But what I'd tell you to focus on is what's happening in the up-and-coming generation. Now, Kelly, who left Chili's yesterday, left for a great job. She's a great leader, okay? So we should feel good about that, right? There were 2 females promoted to CEO and 1 to president in the restaurant industry, 1 at Sonic and 1 at Ruth Chris in the last couple of months. Yay, you know? So let's just keep focusing on bringing forward our best leaders overall and make sure that we're advancing great women leaders as well. We got to focus forward. There's no point focusing backwards. So you can count on me and my industry. I'm going to stay focused on bringing up that next generation of women, and I hope you'll all join me in that effort.
Thank you, Cheryl. Well, let's talk and shift to the second topic related to dignity. And I would really love to hear from you, Cheryl, some concrete ways you think leaders, both male and female, can contribute to treating people with dignity and care.
So we don't need to pause on this too long, but I really did want to touch on it today because I'm kind of annoyed with culture on this point today. So let's go to the labels chart. I think one of the things that we are stuck on in society today are labels. And I don't know about you, but aren't you sick of being called a label? You know, I'm sick of all my labels, whether you're conservative or liberal or educated or not educated or green or white or blue, or, you know, there's 1,000 ways we label one another. And I think we would all agree that conversation's gotten pretty ugly. And dysfunctional. So what I want to challenge you about is labels are ways that we can get quickly to where we stand, and so there's a purpose for them. But when you are leading people, I want you to be super careful about labels. If you go to the next slide, labels are limiting because they cut off conversations. And if you cut off conversations, you have disrespected a human being. You've not treated them with dignity. You follow? If we label people quickly and don't allow a relationship development, we have taken away the dignity of that human being. Let them talk. Let them share with you who they are, what they believe, where their convictions are. So in my first edition of my book, I had this quote: "Without dignity, identity is erased." And Laura Hillebrand was writing about a war hostage situation, a prisoner of war. And I made the point that, we all say human dignity matters. And certainly, if we're talking about prisoners of war that have been treated badly, you would say, oh my goodness, they deserve human dignity. Then we turn around and go to work and don't treat our colleagues with dignity. Okay, we have two different points of view on this, right? In the real world out there in society, it's important, but in our day-to-day life at work, it's not important. So what do I mean by that? How many of you have hauled off on your executive assistant out of anger and frustration and taken away that person's dignity and sent that person home crying at the end of the day? I'm not proud of it, but I've lost my mind a couple times with human beings and had to go back and apologize because my frustration erupted and took away their dignity. So this is concrete and real conversation. If you'll go to the next slide, if you work with people, you want to be focused not on harming them, but on knowing them and growing them, particularly in leadership, because in leadership, you're charged with figuring out where to place them, which project assignments to give them, how to engage them in a proper role in a team. You've got a lot of responsibility to steward them properly, to access their talents, right, in the organization. So here's what I want to encourage you. The antidote on dignity is knowing your team members, knowing as much about them as you can. Build relationship with your people. I mentioned here the ways you do that. You talk to your team about your strengths. You can do that with an assessment and say, what's your strength finder? Or you can just say, hey, tell me something you're super proud of that you do really well. But ask, get in the conversation. You can talk to them about a value. Sometimes at work, we think these are the off-limits things, like we never talk about sex, religion, and politics. But no, values come to work too. What is a value at work that you're really passionate about, that it really causes you pain when you don't see that value in the workplace? Dig in, get to know the person. And of course, life experiences. Who was the single most important person in your life and how did they influence you? What was your biggest failure? What was your biggest success? These are conversations you need to be having with your team. Now, the first question, Becky, I always get asked, do you know what it is?
How do you make time for that?
No, you got it. You got it. And we didn't even set that up.
We didn't.
It's always the question. I remember one of my team members at Popeyes saying, where on earth, Cheryl, do you get the time to know all these people? And the question was asked like, it's a giant annoyance to know all these people. That would take forever. That was kind of what was behind the question. And my flip back to you is, how are you going to lead an organization well if you don't know these people? To me, it's not an option, right? So how do we do this efficiently? Well, here's some specific ideas. Most of us have some kind of coaching routine, right? With a team member, we meet every other week for 30 minutes or every other week for an hour, whatever your schedule is. You can spend a few minutes of that time saying, what have you been reading about this weekend? What strength are you finding really valuable in this current project? You can ask these explore, get to know questions as you do the work, and you can build understanding. Or you could dedicate a whole 30-minute interchange to just, let's just spend today going a little deeper. I don't know you very well, and I'd just like to have an exchange, and I'd like you to know me better too. Let's talk about that. What I want you to think about are the implications if you don't take that time. I'll just give you one example. Have you ever given tough, negative performance feedback to someone you don't know very well? It doesn't go well. You have no clue what's going on in their whole life. You have no context of their prior experiences and what is bringing them to this point of not performing up to your expectations. you're going to be in real trouble in that conversation of connecting with that person and having a real helpful, crucial conversation. So I'll tell you, if you don't invest this time up front, it gets you on the back end. You won't have the relationship to speak into in a time of stress on the business or stress in the performance of the team or the individual.
That's a really helpful framing, Cheryl. And I know the encouragement that you're already engaging in activities where you're connecting with people and just taking the time in the course of that, doing the work together to be able to pause and ask questions and get to know people. It's really powerful.
So one other point I'd mention as a build on that is this works with your customers. It works with your franchisees if you're in a franchise model. It works with your congregation if you're in a faith-based organization. You need to be out and about getting to know the people you serve. And of course, in the large groups, like all your customers or 300 franchisees at Popeyes, you have to do it in a little bit more systematic way. You might do go around the country and do town halls and listen to your customer groups, or you might do a survey to get feedback. There's other ways you have to go about it with large groups of people, but the same principle holds. If you really don't know where those audiences are coming from, you will struggle to serve them well.
Do you have any specific examples of how you implemented that at Popeyes and the results that you saw?
Well, the specific one that comes to mind is our franchisees were the #1 audience we focused on serving and helping them become successful. We did an annual survey of the entire body in the summer, every summer for 9 years, and had them score us on the key attributes of what they needed from their leadership. And we gave them lots of open-ended questions where they could type in whatever their concern was. So we could just read those open-ended responses and get some real insight from our franchisees. And then with a smaller group, there was a leadership group of 10. We met every quarter for 2 full days and went deep because they served as our eyes and ears out to the broader franchisee body. They would collect feedback from their peers and bring it back for these conversations on strategy and direction of the business. So we had multiple approaches. The important thing was they were routines. You could count on them for feedback opportunities. We also did town halls in the fall, so you knew when you would get a chance to speak up and provide your feedback.
So one of our attendees typed a comment that I thought I would share with you, Cheryl. Amy is saying that she remembers you engaging her in a get to know you conversation back when she was a relative newbie in marketing, and it has stuck with her all these years later. And so I think that's one important thing when you treat people with dignity and you genuinely care about getting to know them. That's probably way different than what many people experience in the workplace. So it's sure to stand out.
Well, thank you, Amy, for that comment. I'm grateful. And I do think it lets you know just how much a person values that, right? We've each felt that ourselves, right? How you're welcome to a new job kind of tells you everything you need to know, right? Are they really excited that I came today, or nobody noticed and I'm sitting at a desk with the HR paperwork? It's very important to welcome people, to have eye contact and genuine exchange. And as Amy said, you remember it. You remember it.
So we did have a question that came into the question panel that's relevant at this moment that I want to get your feedback on. So what about the objection, Cheryl, that if you share personal information, that somehow that could be used negatively in the future? So either like someone manipulating you if they know things about you personally, or even like later it's a legal issue potentially if you let someone go. So how would you handle that resistance factor of, I don't want to let people get too close because it's dangerous when I let people know me?
Yeah, I think a couple of thoughts. One is we spend a lot of our waking hours together at work. You're going to spend more time with your work colleagues than your spouse and your children and your friends. So, I think to say the workplace is devoid of genuine human relationship would be sad. That'd be a big hunk of our life to be disjointed from relationships. So I think we have to have rich human relationships at work. I don't really know how to do great work together as a team without relationship. Have you ever tried to win a relay race and not know your teammates and never practice? I mean, it's just counter to logic. So here's the answer to the person's question. You do have to, as a leader, you are responsible for creating a safe workplace for people to be transparent. It has to be safe. There can't be retribution. And I do remember we had a vice president on our team at Popeyes, and he told me, he said, the last time I was transparent about my life experiences, I got fired. And he said, tell me how this is going to be different. Wow. And I said, I am really sorry for that experience. And I want to create a place where there is no consequence for the truth and no consequence for sharing good and bad life experiences, right? We all have them, right? But here's what you have to do as a leader to create that safe place. First, you have to model the transparency yourself. I have to tell you I've been fired from a job and how wrecked I was over it. You have to hear me be transparent and vulnerable to believe you can be. And then, as the questioner implies, then I have to make sure as the leader that we only take in your personal information in a way that advances how we know you and grow you, and never in an inappropriate way. And that's just a trust commitment we have to make to our people. Stephen M. R. Covey says trust is the foundation of every business practice, and it is absolutely the foundation of doing good work together. So we have to create that trust.
Thanks, Cheryl. Let's shift to talking about this whole area of performance, because I imagine there are some people listening who are, hearing our focus on caring about people and wondering exactly how we're going to get the work done. So, Aubrey, if we could shift to the performing. So, Cheryl, talk to me a little bit about how important results are and how you can balance caring for your people with getting good results.
So a story I often tell about this is when I was raising my children, we moved a lot. So every new city, we had to pick a school. And I interviewed all the schools looking for the right place for my kids. And basically, here's how it turned out. Some of the schools taught character traits, and some of the schools had good curriculum. And I would come home at night screaming, why do I have to choose one or the other? Why isn't there an and? Why can't I send my kids to a school that develops their competence and their character? Because that's what I wanted for my children. And, over time, you hunt for that special one that does it. Here's how that pertains to this matter. In business, we have an or statement around performance results and being a caring organization. And here's what it looks like. I'm going to tease you now first. So come with me on this journey. If you are a proclaimed servant leader on this call today, first, I want to thank you. You've got the courage of your convictions. But let me challenge you to be the servant leader that generates superior results in whatever organization, whatever place of influence you stand, because it's an and, not an or. Because here's the other side of it. If you happen to accidentally come on this call because you didn't know it was about servant leadership, and you're a results-oriented person, and you're like, hey, Cheryl, it's perform or die. This is corporate America. What are you smoking? We can't stand around caring and hugging for people. You're out of your mind. If you're that person, hang here with me too. Because what I'm telling you, the performer is, if you marry your performance passion with caring, you'll get better performance. So do you hear the and? We have to bring these two things together, that you cannot care about the people and not lead them to positive performance results, right? Have you ever worked for a company that's in decline? And would anyone on the call tell me that's fun? No, I already know the answer, right? No, it's not fun to work for a company that's suffering. The goal is to get every organization performing, because that's when the people thrive, grow, find new challenges, get promoted, get a raise, get a bonus check, right? That's where all the fun is. And so it's fun and it's results. So caring people on the phone, I do want you to care about your team members, listen carefully to them, know them well. But you also have a responsibility to bring them to high performance. What does that look like? It means set very clear expectations. It includes holding your team members accountable to delivering what they said they would do. That's fair, right? We all sign up for a job. We all sign up to deliver results. It's fair to hold people accountable. And you have to give real talk, candid feedback to your team members. That's part of your job as a caring leader. I mean, right, I tend to refer back to my kids because they taught me most of my life lessons, but right, a teenager needs some tough love, and so do adult human beings. So if we truly love the people we work with, the people that we're developing, true love is an action verb. It means we care about them, but caring includes accountability and performance. Does that make sense?
It sure does. Do you have any practical ideas for how to balance those two? We do have a question that came in, and Jennifer is working on a research study related to how servant leaders can handle times of employee betrayal, like layoffs, changes in benefits. And so I'm wondering, referencing what you said about working in a company that's declining, are there ways when the results aren't there that a servant leader can more effectively
I've got a great story for you on that very point, because it's a beautiful question. At Popeyes, we did do a restructure of the company to fund new IT, information technology capability, and it did involve a layoff of about 30 people. And our team was pretty heartbroken over having to take that step. Knew it had to be done. The business would not survive competitively without a stronger IT capability. But, you know, you hate to part with your family, and we felt like family. So here's a really cool way to think about the tough conversations. How can we make the toughest communications and conversations loving conversations? And I attribute this entirely to the amazing group of people services team at Popeyes. They sat down with leadership and said, listen, the typical layoff looks like this. You call people in one by one, give them a pink slip, and automatically hand them their car keys and escort them to their car. They usually don't even get to go back to their desk and get their pictures. That's what it usually looks like. And they said, that makes us sick to our stomach. We want to do it differently. And they mapped out an hour-by-hour schedule. Now, I'm telling you, we still did the layoff. Okay, we did the hard thing, but we treated every person with dignity. We sent the people that were staying with Popeyes home, and we stayed behind with the people that we were exiting and gave them time and dignity to get their computers sorted out. We gave them access to their phones. We let them pack up their boxes. We, stayed with them for support. We had outside support available to them. We made them the priority and said, on Monday when we come back, we'll resume activities with the rest of the body. But today we're going to dedicate our time to those impacted. And I'll tell you, it was still a difficult day. I won't sugarcoat it. But those people told us that they were treated with dignity and differently than they would have been treated somewhere else. So there's one example.
That's a really touching story, and we have a couple of comments in the chat about that. So thank you for sharing that, Cheryl. I'm watching the time, and it looks like we have about less than 20 minutes left to take some questions that have been coming in, but I want to make sure, Cheryl, that you've shared all your thoughts about results before we move to the question.
Yes, I will jump to a finding here, and then we'll jump to questions because I really love the dialogue. I want to draw your attention to some new writings about culture that include this topic of results and caring for your team members. The January-February issue of Harvard Business Review is full of culture topics. And the one that I really like is called The Leader's Guide to Corporate Culture. And if you'll take a look at that article, you will find that they've now actually done research that says the number one and number two culture style today that's working, number one is results and number two is caring. And nothing else came close. Now, what else did they look at? They looked at other factors like purpose-driven companies, learning companies, enjoyment, playful companies, authority, safety, order. And there were some examples of companies that did those things, like Zappos is all about a fun place to work. And, the federal government's all about security and order and that kind of thing. So, but other than those kind of unusual examples, the most powerful combination they talk about in this article is results and caring. So I just wanted to draw that to your attention. I hope that's provocative to you, that it's an and, not an or. So Becky, let's jump in and get some questions.
Sure, and I'm trying to sort through them. So this one just popped up, and I'm going to ask it because I like it. Nathan is asking, you've shared what you've been thinking about, and Nathan is curious what you're working on, and maybe we should save that till the very end of the call. But if there's anything that you're working on that you would want to share beyond the stuff that we're going to share later, he's wondering what's next for you.
My life today is a little bit of a hodgepodge of things that I enjoy working on, but I'm enjoying a new balance. I serve on public boards, currently 2. I coach a few CEOs. I want to go deep with a few CEOs and really help them transform their entities. That's been very rewarding. I'm working in philanthropy, and I have a little bit more time in my life for friends and family, which is that relationship thing we talked about, right? I would tell you it's really been rich to have a little bit more bandwidth for that part of my life. So that's how I describe it.
Sure. Christina is wondering how you learned to become a serving leader.
Good question. First thing that comes to mind is observation. People ask me who my mentor was, and I say my notebook. Because when I entered the workforce, there were very few women leaders. And to be honest, I was often kind of intimidated to ask my really hard questions. So I carried around a notebook and observed great leadership traits and what I would call terrible leadership traits. And it was really helpful. It turned out, to be honest, the list I had about things I never want to do if I become a big deal leader was really long. And the things that I learned about great leadership was shorter. But over time, that began to shape this idea of what are my convictions about leadership. Then I read a ton. I really studied the findings on servant leadership and financial performance. There's 3 or 4 really seminal books. Give and Take is one. Firms of Endearment, Good to Great that we mentioned earlier. Study the topic and really decide where you're going to put your stake as a leader, where your convictions lie. And then frankly, I think some time had to progress, like experience, right? I had to get enough experience as a leader to be confident in my convictions. That's a natural maturation process. So if you don't yet feel confident in your convictions, you're on the way, you're on a journey. But I would encourage you to dig deep, take notes, refine.
So Cheryl, someone's asking if you can share an example of someone you've seen who's had a 180 as it relates to how they lead. Do you have any stories about someone who's turned from being a maniac and narcissistic leader to having a servant's heart?
Yes, I do, but no names will be used. So, because in fairness to people that have made transformation in their leadership, I mean, that's a courageous undertaking. And here's what I've learned about that. At Popeyes, after we established this Dare to Serve culture, we were still hiring people from the outside to come into Popeyes. And they would say, oh, I can't wait to work for this kind of company. And then some of them would get inside and say, this is weird. I don't know how to behave here. I don't know what you expect. This is not how I've learned to lead. And, we'd have the tough personalities and the high ego personalities would somehow get through the filter, and they'd be really confused. And so we started to talk about, in fairness to people who've never experienced this, we said there's detox period. We got to give people detox time because culture and other job experiences have taught them the wrong way to lead. And we're going to be in charge of helping them understand a better way to lead. So we expressed empathy and early patience, but not too much patience, right? I kind of called it the 3-time rule. We're going to explain 3 times to you that behavior is not okay in our culture, and we expect to see adaptation. Because I believe, I can develop your skills. If you need to be a more effective marketer or a better financial analyst, I know what to do. But if you've got the wrong attitude about how we lead and don't share our principles, we got to get that sorted out quickly for you to be effective and for our culture to be effective. So that's kind of how we would talk about it. We would give people time. And yes, I have seen complete and total transformations. And I'll tell you what's at the heart of the change, Becky, is when the person realizes that the actual value in their heart is not what they're living at work. And I'll just go back to that simple dignity example. If you have lived your life espousing to everyone that I believe in human dignity and I do this to demonstrate it, I'm a good society person, I give to the Red Cross, and then you come to work and ream people, you're incongruent in your heart. And the aha there is really painful when you discover that, but it's really powerful because you have the power to change who you are and how you behave at work. Every one of us has the power to change. And so if you think you're struggling in this arena, I want to encourage you. Start with your heart, get straight what you believe and your convictions, and then start practicing. This is a practice every day. None of us are great every day. It takes time to evolve these skills, but start down that path.
So Cheryl, just a quick comment before I go to another question. We do have a franchisee from Popeyes on the line who said that I think it's he learned a lot from Miss Cheryl and that you were a great CEO in Popeyes history. So just a little bit of encouragement coming in.
Thank you to that franchisee. I miss you very much.
So there have been a couple of questions, Cheryl, about how successful female CEOs can manage their families, and then also, how if you're a leader in an organization, you can prioritize your involvement in activities outside of work. And Kim is saying, for full-time working moms with little ones at home who want to be involved in the community, how can you find that balance?
Right. Couple thoughts. It is a very complex question, right? Work-life balance might be the hardest question I ever get asked. So I'll try to give you a couple things I've learned over a very long period of time that may be helpful to you. The first is this whole topic of purpose that I talk about in my book, knowing why you work and why you parent and why you're active in the community. You got to figure that out because that's the motive, the thing that inspires you to get out of bed in the morning and do all these things, right? Because this is a lot to take on. If you decide to be a leader, a parent, and a community leader, you're going to have a very full plate. That's just a given. So you got to know the why you do it, because on any given day, it's going to feel like a lot of pressure and a lot of juggling. The why also helps you sort out conflicts. You have to rank order those things. I was in a board meeting once and my daughter was in a car wreck during the board meeting. My assistant comes to the door and says, your daughter's in a car wreck. What are you going to do? And I looked at the board and I said, I'm going to leave now. I knew what that rule was. I knew car wreck superseded board. And one of my colleagues looked at me like I'd lost my mind. And I said, so sorry, you'll still be here when I get back, but I've got to go take care of this. So know your rank order when the moment of truth comes, right? And the other thing is seasons. I have 3 daughters. 2 of them are married, 1 single. 1 of them has 3 children, 1 has no children. So they're in this growing, developing stage of life, trying to figure this stuff out along with many of you. And watching them, I'm reminded of some of the things I experienced. It's okay to have a season where all you do is raise your little kids and go to work. There may be no way to do anything more than that. You can't run a small study group in the community and raise money for the Red Cross and raise your 2-year-old and go to work 9 hours. It just doesn't fit. So think of life more in seasons. Now that my children are grown, I go to a lot of night events and I go out to many community fundraisers and I do all kinds of things, but I did not do them when my kids were little. It wasn't that important then. Right? So be careful to choose the seasons of your life. Every season is rich. There's different opportunities in every season, but don't kill yourself trying to do it all at once.
Well, and I'll echo what a lot of people are saying in the chat. This is exceedingly encouraging to those of us women who are juggling different seasons in our life. So thank you for sharing your wisdom with us today.
Becky, here's one more little thing for both men and women who parent.
Mm-hmm.
If you like this, if you are on this call because you like leadership development, if you're a leader developer in the workplace, think of your home as the same. Think of yourself as developing future leaders in your home. I have had so much fun thinking about that with my girls and saying, you know, what character traits am I building in my children? What competencies am I encouraging them to develop? Because the skills are very similar between parenting and developing leaders at work. And it makes you feel more like a whole person. So that's one little tidbit I'd give you that kind of helped me sort and make all my jobs kind of one thing.
Mm-hmm. That's exceedingly powerful and a good reminder. I've always look to you as a mentor in that way, Cheryl. I have 3 daughters as well. Some people who are on the call might know that. And to just see the way that you have balanced your leadership and your involvement with your kids over the years is incredible. So I think I probably speak for some that are on the call when I say that. We really only have time for one more question, and then we have a couple of follow-up items to share with everyone. And I liked this question that came in from Dawn, and she's wondering, what is most difficult about consistently implementing the values of servant leadership in the workplace? And do you have any practical advice for people in how to stay the course?
Yes, the simple but hard answer, right? Simple but hard answer to that question is the number one impediment to being a servant leader is self, right? You don't just suddenly get over yourself because you say, I want to be a servant leader. You're going to bump into yourself, your ego, your grumpy self, the wrong side of self. And so the number one thing I recommend to people is a lot of mirror checking, a lot of looking in the mirror. If you get ready to go to work in the morning and you're grumpy, look in the mirror and say, how well am I going to lead these folks today if I show up grumpy? If you get to work and have a difficult meeting, get ready for the meeting ahead of time. Don't go in there with emotions flying or chaos flying. I'm in a busy day. I didn't have time to prepare. Get your act together for the sake of the people. So getting in front of these situations with self-management, I think, is the hardest thing and the most important thing. So I remind all of you that being a dare to serve leader is something you can only aspire to daily. You can't claim it and say you've accomplished it, because you'll catch yourself doing something selfish and stupid in a couple of hours and have to look in the mirror and go, oh, darn. So what do? You say, hey, folks, I'm sorry. I came in here steaming and didn't have my plan together for this meeting. I want to start over. Let's go fresh. Admit it and move on and be better tomorrow.
Thanks so much. And I think that speaks to the humility that you mentioned earlier, that really makes a difference in someone being effective. So we want to make sure that everyone knows about some really exciting opportunities and resources coming from Cheryl. There's a brand new to be released next month, I think, in October, correct, Cheryl? Dare to Serve online training. It's a master course in servant leadership, and it will be announced and available soon. So we would invite all of you to go to Cheryl's website at CherylBachelder.com so that we can email you as soon as that course is available for sale. And I know, Cheryl, I saw some photos on Instagram where you were filming the videos that formed the course. Is there anything more about the course that you would like our attendees to know about?
So this is a course like a school class you'd buy, 5 weeks long. You get video content and you get a weekly opportunity to have a conversation like this about the topics. So 5 weeks, you can buy it starting, I believe, October 3rd, and it starts the middle of October.
Great, thank you so much. And then the second thing we want to let folks know about, so first go to CherylBachelder.com, look in the sidebar, we'll take your email address and we'll email you as soon as the course is open for enrollment. The second is that the new edition of Dare to Serve is coming soon, and we did have a question, Cheryl, about what's different in the new edition. I know there are several new chapters and some learnings since you left Popeyes. Can you give our listeners a view of what's new in the new edition? It's also a paperback. The original edition was a hardcover. So what else?
Yes, so 2 main things. We surveyed our readers to find out what you would like more of in the second edition, and there were 2 things. You did want to hear more about the story of Popeyes and the sale and what happened. So we did a bit of an epilogue chapter. And in that chapter, share a lot of insights from the Popeyes team. You hear from 20 or 30 of the Popeyes team members, what they learned from the 10-year experience, how it impacted their leadership. So I think you'll get a lot out of hearing from them. And then the second chapter we added at the end is you ask for more concrete examples of how you do this in your day job, specific circumstances. So we call that switching from self to serve, with concrete examples of what you would do if you were a self-focused leader compared to what you would do if you were a dare to serve leader. And I will mention the online master course will have even more of that kind of concrete conversation. So we tried to bring you back what you asked for. I hope you enjoy it. And I just thank you for your support.
Cheryl, thank you so much for investing your time with us here today. I hope all of you that are on the call will take a look at the social media links and connect with Cheryl after today's event, and also that you'll go and pre-order your own copy or copies for your team of the brand new edition, which is coming very soon. Again, Cheryl, thank you so much for investing with us today.
My pleasure. It was good to be with all of you.